Well, saying as long as you don't hack us, we won't hack you back. It's kind of like saying if you don't spy on us, we won't spy on you. No, we're going to spy on you, and you're going to spy on us. It's just a fact of matter.
Welcome to the Security Boulevard, the cybersecurity podcast from the Futurum Group. Each episode explores a variety of topics within cybersecurity and the technologies that drive it. You can find us on securityboulevard.com, the Security Boulevard YouTube channel, TechStrong TV, and all of your favorite podcast platforms. We're going to be talking about nation-state actors today, but before we do that, let's jump in and introduce our hosts for this episode, starting with Mitch.
Hi, Mitch Ashley, and I lead the software lifecycle engineering practice at Futurum, covering all things development and cloud native and software security, lots of good stuff, and of course, AI.
Awesome. And Fernando?
Hi, Fernando Montenegro. I lead the cybersecurity and resilience practice of everything. Let me say the word AI just to get it out of the way. AI. Good. And it's a true pleasure to work alongside Mitch on covering different things and with you, Tom, as well. So,
well, thank you. And as Fernando mentioned, I am Tom Hollingsworth, security event lead here at Tech Field Day, which is a part of the Futurum Group. And I'm very glad to be joined with two of my regular co-hosts this week. As we jump into today's topic, we're going to be talking about nation-state actors. And why is that a big deal? If you have seen the news recently, as of October 2025, you know that F5 suffered from a massive breach. It was rather embarrassing. Some people got in, they got access to some user information. They may have also gotten access to some patches for zero-day exploits that people were putting together to potentially save some egg on the face moments. But one of the things that came out of this that I thought was rather fascinating was the fact that a lot of F5 customers are governments, and specifically the U.S. federal government. And one of the anecdotes that was mentioned in the press releases was that they believe that the group that did this was acting on behalf of a nation state. And we've seen that a lot recently. If you go all the way back to the massive SolarWinds hack, that was done by a nation state actor. We've seen the rise of attackers being backed by organizations that are formal governments, as opposed to just hacking collectives or, kids that are out to deface websites for cred. And I wanted to take a moment to pick your brains, because I think we're starting to see the shift from harmless or somewhat harmful attacks to criminal enterprise to now hacking as a form of intelligence gathering and maybe even producing outcomes for cyber warfare?
well, I would argue we have to go even back before SolarWinds, right? Many of us were around when Operation Aurora targeted Google, right? Or even, I don't remember the timeline, just before or after, when RSA security was hit as a precursor to people attacking, I believe it was Lockheed Martin at the time, right? So yeah, this has been around, and it's on one hand fascinating, on the other terrifying, undoubtedly sobering, in the sense that yes, this matters, and we are increasingly seeing I find myself repeating things because I quote Mark Andreessen, right? He said back in 2011, "Software is eating the world," right? Yeah, he was right. And the moment that software ate the world, how you interact with the world through software means that these highly sophisticated actors now have the means and motive and opportunity to go after these systems in many, many forms. You can even argue like Stuxnet, of course, as another thing. So yeah, this is all over the place.
So
this is real.
So Fernando, I'm actually glad that you brought up Stuxnet, because that's a point that I wanted to call out here, because a lot of people, when I start saying nation states, they're like, oh yeah, remember when parties unknown hacked the Iranian nuclear program? I actually draw a distinction at Stuxnet because to me, Stuxnet has all the fingerprints of a traditional intelligence operation. It was designed for a very specific impact where we were trying to prevent centrifuges from spinning up and things like that. What we're seeing now is effectively, if you want to call them that, contractors. Think of all of the various fancy bears or the APT groups that are being bankrolled by Far East countries. I won't name names because I'd rather not get targeted. But the fact is that essentially what we're saying is, as long as you're not hacking us and you're going after people that we would prefer that you go after, companies to get persistence and collect intelligence that we can use to further our aims, we're basically going to turn a blind eye or offer you refuge from international organizations that might be looking to take you down. And honestly, we've seen that a lot in Eastern Europe for a long time. Certain organizations are being effectively shielded from Interpol and other organizations just because, well, you're hacking the people that we want you to hack.
Well, saying as long as you don't hack us, we won't hack you back. It's kind of like saying if you don't spy on us, we won't spy on you. No, we're going to spy on you, and you're going to spy on us. It's just a fact of matter. I mean, you think about the national security theaters. Yes, it's land, sea, and air. It's a fourth one is cyber, and it is active. And you don't prepare for a cyber war just by building up, skills and infrastructure to be able to do cyber attacks. You actually perform them. You test. It's just like you do incursions across the border. These attacks, I think, are both intentional as intelligence gathering, but they're also tests to say, all right, how vulnerable is this? We really wanted to take down an electrical grid in this country. Could we? So when we need to do it, we can do it. It's just like we train the Navy SEALs to go out and do missions and do strikes. That's essentially what we're doing. We and everyone else is doing, and the nation states are doing. And they hire, it's not just them, they hire groups, Cozy Bear and all the different groups that will do this for them. So they don't have to have all the skills internally. And I think it's a very active theater. It's not something where we have sitting there waiting to go, just like we have aircraft carriers patrolling around different parts of the oceans across the globe. We very much have cyber teams, both internal and external to our government agencies that are active in doing things.
And I love the topic because I wanted because it brings to the front two things, right? It brings to the front the reality of like that software eating the world thing. In other words, this is affecting everybody. It also brings to the front, okay, what do you do, or like, what does this mean to you as a practitioner, right? Whether you are an executive, whether you are mid-level management, whether you are an individual contributor, right? What I find the topic fascinating because it highlights the changing nature of the threat environment, right? So when you are going to threat model, right, what your defenses should look like, well, exactly as you said, Tom, these groups are being supported by nation-state actors, which means that these groups have increasing levels of capabilities that that are coming to bear on you. And I think that there are two important scenarios. I know we should do in threes, but two important scenarios to consider. One is, what is your role in terms of critical infrastructure? Is your organization along that critical infrastructure supply chain, right? Where are you, right? Because that dictates how interesting you may be to a nation-state level actor. That's one consideration. The other consideration, and I love the fact that you brought up that these are groups being supported. Okay, can now those groups also use those capabilities outside of the objectives of a nation-state actor? Hey, look, I'm going to use this XYZ, or Z, in Canada, XYZ tool to hack a power plant. I'm going to use the same tool to go after some small credit union because, hey, I want the money, right? So what does that mean for organizations in terms of the spillage of those capabilities, particularly when you're considering affiliated groups as opposed to actors that are employed by the defense establishment or of those respective countries?
You know, go I was just going to say, thinking about it, threat modeling, and this is really a strong area of yours, Fernando, is when we talk about nation states for enterprise or personally, usually security threats are mostly around financial gain, right? Getting information that they can use for financial purposes. Nation states have other interests too, right? It's disruption of society, disrupting the financial markets. It's if we're going to attack a country, just like we want to take out their radar systems and their satellite systems and GPS, those kind of systems that countries rely on for both operational and also for defense that you want to be able to take out or destroy. So there can be all kinds of reasons. Could just also be for misinformation, right? That's part of what this security threat is the social media aspect of it, or building up presence in software, open source software teams that they can then inject code into a code base that's distributed widely. So there's a lot of different purposes when you think about the nation state part of it, that in addition to what the impact is to us individually and to businesses.
And I think that's important to point out there that you guys are right, that it feels there's a shift in the way that people think. Your average attacker wants to get paid, right? They jump in, they steal as much data as they can, they ransom it back to the organization, or they offer to sell it on the web somewhere. And it's your typical, if you want to think of it as from a true crime podcast, it's a smash and grab operation, right? Let's do as much damage as we can, and on the way out, we might get paid, and we'll live to do it another day. Nation states don't work that way. They want persistence. They want intelligence gathering capability. And Fernando, to your point, you do have to look at the targets that they've gone after. They've attacked monitoring systems like SolarWinds. They've gone after inline traffic analysis systems like F5. They want to stick around. They want to be able to examine all the data that's going through and manipulate it. And if we go back to something that was big last year, the Salt Typhoon hack that basically was rooted so deeply into the telecom infrastructure that the U.S. federal government had to set aside money to rip that infrastructure out and replace it. There was even talk of them monitoring telephone calls from political candidates. And that's, you think about it like in terms of traditional intelligence. I want to get an asset inside and keep them there, because the longer they can persist inside the organization, the better. But going back to your point, when you have someone, for lack of a better term, a hoodlum that you've hired to go do this, and you've given them these fancy, cool tools to see if they work, your supposition is that I will let you use this tool to do the thing that I want so that I have plausible deniability in case you get caught. But if then that actor turns around and goes and uses that tool somewhere else on a small job and burns it because now that exploit is going to be patched and become unavailable, I could see a nation state becoming very angry that you've basically sold out years worth of intelligence gathering for, I don't know, 8 Bitcoin.
Perfectly valid. It's a scenario that I don't have any visibility into, like what happens with those actors, but that is a possibility. And the thing that fascinates me is that if you think about conventional weapons, right? It's not as if somebody is going to replicate a high-end rifle or a high-end tank or a high-end whatever. Software is software, right? So how easy is it to replicate that knowledge? And how easy is it for somebody to say, oh yeah, this is what we were doing over at the classified side of that my engagement. I'm going to build a little one on the side here that, looks just like that. Right. So it becomes difficult to control for sure. Right? The thing about it though is that regardless of what happens to that individual or individuals who misuse those tools, I keep going back to what does it matter for the average practitioner is that we expect to see an increased sophistication of your attackers, right? I'm not sure if you guys ever read, do you remember Usenix, the login magazine? James Mickens had a column back in, I want to say 2012, This World of Ours, where he had the threat model. And that threat model was very simple. It was, okay, you're trying to prevent you're trying to prevent against your ex, you're trying to prevent your ex from looking at your emails, whatever. Okay, that's one level of precaution. You're trying to prevent against your typical malicious hoodlum doing whatever to your finances. That's another level of problem. You're trying to protect against, I'm not going to name it, but he said, very sophisticated spy agency doing something to you. You're not going to do that. Like, you go live or go buy amulets and go live on a submarine or something like that, because you are going to get hit. The challenge is that those capabilities are floating down, right? Are flowing downstream. So now, and yes, we can bring AI into this. Your typical adversary, the difference between a sophisticated adversary now and the nation state is potentially shrinking. So what does that mean for, again, your threat models? How does your organization defend itself against it? Sorry.
I agree with you. I think that there's a point where you're effectively saying that no amount of protection is going to keep me out of your network if I work for someone like that. The only hope, of course, is that we realize that, every opening in software is has a finite lifetime. You call them 0 days or whatever, but eventually that will get fixed, right? Someone will detect it. Unless, and this is a story we covered a couple of years ago, the government has a heavy enough hand in the organizations that it works with to create effectively permanent situations. And I know everyone's probably nodding at home, and the government that I'm about to say, right? Yeah, what if it was the US NSA? Because we know for a fact that there was a suggestion that someone weaken elliptical curve cryptography for a given particular piece of networking gear that would allow the NSA to monitor things. And why do we know about it? Well, because it was detected and reversed and used against us by a foreign government who said, oh, you want us to buy a whole bunch of this gear with this weakened cryptography program? What if we did it right back to you? And so it's that danger that we saw in 2013 when Edward Snowden reported on all the things that he knew. And a lot of those tools got out into the wild and basically created a new generation of super malware. If you look at what a lot of those hacks in the 2014 through 2018 era were, they were all based on disassembled, recompiled, re-engineered CIA hacking tools. I mean, look at all the things we've seen from Pegasus recently. They were basically exploiting multiple unknown vulnerabilities in iOS and Android software. And the connection to nation state sponsoring was fairly well covered. But the fact that a lot of the people who were Pegasus customers were nation states should scare the crap out of everybody.
One of the unsettling things about the times that we're in is with the changing in funding and government organizations within the U.S. CISA getting reduced funding, and it's hard to know what programs, because there are a lot of programs that they have in place or have had, like Shields Up and the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative. There are a whole bunch of, InfraGard, all kinds of different organizations that are about public-private cooperation, which is part of what you need in these situations, because as an entity, business entity, individual, you're not going to solve those bigger problems. But also the government needs our help too. And I don't spend my 100% of my days in security like I used to. So it's a little unsettling to say, what are those things are working? And if we are attacked right now, or if something happens, or if a threat is detected is a potential to happen, are we preventing those?
And the thing I love this topic because it helps us um, it helps us give practitioners a lens into what should you be concerned about, right? Even if it's not that you should be concerned about in terms of this is going to hit you today, but as you are working with your organization and you are discussing with your senior leadership about what's our threat model, right? You have to understand. You might say, you know what? Yes, we're going to bring the level down of nation state attackers down to a manageable level, and we calculate. We can go into the whole thing about cyber risk quantification, about what is the impact of that particular threat on our organization. But you should be aware of them, right? It's like the I used to do martial arts. The martial arts practitioners that knows how to fight 10 different styles, but only needs three or four. You need to be able to know what that adversary can potentially do so that you can advise your leadership about, hey, let's do this, let's do that. And I bring this to bear on the context of what Mitch just said, because as we see changes in public programs for cybersecurity guidance, one of the things we notice is that there is a lot of interest in pushing those things down to the state level, right? State and county and municipal levels, right? Well, now those teams are being left to look. We used to come to a national organization to help us support with things like threat intelligence and whatnot. Now we are left to fend for ourselves. What do we do, right? And that is a question that we should all be helping them answer in some way, shape, or form.
Yes, I agree. The other question that I had for you kind of involves what happens when we detect them and how do we fix this? Because one of the tenets, if you want to call it that, of a civilized society is that breaking the law has consequences. And if someone does something and we catch them, we should be able to punish them according to our laws. And one of the things that makes cybercrime so difficult is that those rules are not applied equally in all places. For example, there is a long history of North Korean cyber criminals, cyber hackers, who are stealing Bitcoin and laundering it everywhere and violating a lot of norms. But then, well, how are we going to go get them out of North Korea? Because that's a sovereign nation, right? We can't just invade to arrest the guy who hacked the president's cell phone. And we run into this problem. Kind of, I alluded to it earlier. When you are backed by a nation state, you effectively have tacit permission from that nation state to do things, provided you follow their rules and such. And we've seen organizations that have been protected by governments. The Internet Research Agency in St. Petersburg is probably the biggest beneficiary of being affiliated with a nation state. But at the same time, we've also seen nation states turn on these groups where it's like, okay, you have now become too hot for us to deal with. And so they effectively do burn them in the industry and let Interpol raid their organization and take them out to kind of lay down the heat when they maybe attack too big of a target. Should we be treating these organizations differently because their crimes are not committed on sovereign soil, but instead in cyberspace?
Well, I think it's like the copyright laws. Those are really nice laws. Not sure I'm going to follow them with your copyrighted movies or whatever. It's the ability to enforce those laws. And most of the time, that means you're going through whatever nation that is, to even if you know who the people who perpetrated something is. If you're going to an attack, that you have to work through them to get access to them. The other side of it is, you think about the espionage part of it. Those groups are susceptible to some kind of an attack. Let's be honest about it. If there was a group in whatever country that was being very effective at hacking into our national infrastructure, and our government decided we wanted to take them out, they're not going to ask for permission. They're going to go take them out, and it'll look like something else. You could think of the conspiracy theory or the movie that's going to happen. But I believe those things happen, and that's what you sign up for when you do this, any kind of espionage type of thing.
Yeah, I don't have enough information on the topic. The thing I'll refer to is that I wish I had a law degree so that I could study the law of the sea a little bit better, because this throws us back to the early days of piracy, right? And are we going to be issuing letters of marque to go after criminals, and how do we respond? And the other thing is, again, I know it's not an answer, but it's incredible how often I think there's a quote attributed to Edward Wilson, a biologist. The problem with humanity, or the problem with mankind, is that we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. Right? And that permeates everything that we do. So here we are debating the finer points of how do we use this technology that we have available to us, right? Surrounded by laws and principles that are decades, centuries old, right? While trying to navigate the human brain, which is very, as I said, Paleolithic. Like here we have the tribes and that we all belong to, and the fears that we have, and the instincts that we have, us versus others, right? Sorry, I know this is completely different from a cybersecurity podcast, but it's relevant, right? If there's one thing I hope we can help our industry grow, is we have to think about these problems in a broader sense, right? It can't be just, okay, let's patch. Okay, let's apply packet filters here, or next gen firewall over there, right? Or API security, or whatever, right? We have to think about, these are broader societal problems, and whether we like it or not, we are smack in the middle of them, right? And it's not going to get any better, right? There is no silver lining at the end of this. This is modern conflict, and we're into it. I love that there's a group that have always done some work on this, like I am the cavalry, right? It's up to us, right? The cavalry is not coming. Like, how do we improve ourselves? How do we improve our organizations to incorporate nation-state threat actors into our worldview, right? So, sorry, I think it's a fascinating topic.
No, I think sometimes getting a little poetical closure from Fernando is the way to go here, because this is a problem that isn't going to go away. We've seen the way that warfare is being prosecuted by people in modern society, and we have a set of conventions that govern the way that we prosecute warfare in physical space. I've said for years that we need something very similar in the cyber realm, because it's only a matter of time before someone figures out how to shut down a power plant or open up a hydroelectric dam and cause some massive problems for people. And, eventually we will reach a point where those kinds of things are off limits, so to speak. But I don't know that we're going to solve that problem today. What we will do today, though, is wrap up this podcast. And I want to take a chance for Mitch and Fernando to tell you some of the stuff that they're working on, because as part of the Future Room Group, they're doing wonderful research. And I know that they're working very hard. So, Mitch, if people want to get a hint of what you're working on, what have you got on your plate?
Yeah, one of the areas that I follow real closely is around open standards with AI. Things like everybody's heard about MCP and agent-to-agent communications, but they're now starting to address more infrastructure types of standards, but also security. And there's a long ways to go. We have a long ways to go to being able to secure not only agents but LLMs and the software that we build upon that. So it's a nice intersection with Fernando, because it hits on multiple fronts when we talk about AI security. And then just on an ongoing software security supply chain, not only the software we build, but the tool chains and the underlying infrastructure and sources of code that are susceptible to being injected into attack and become part of that threat service that they can take advantage of, nation state or not.
Yeah, from my perspective, like Mitch just peer reviewed, and I just published a paper on software supply chain just recently. So, Mitch, thank you very much. Right, and so that just came out. So the public summary is, I think it was published on Friday, this past Friday, and but beyond that, it's a very busy quarter for us. And one of the things I'm working on right now is that we have our cybersecurity decision maker survey data rolling in. As a matter of fact, when we're due with this recording, one of the things I'll do is review some of the data that just came in this morning, and that covers a wide range of topics, including what we call like organizational impacts to security. So I'm looking forward to seeing what that data looks like and publish it. The other thing is that I'm working on a report kind of tied to this topic, which is I'm horrible with puns, and as many people know. One of the one I think that the one I'm going to use, that we are now reaching the it's not the World Wide Web, it's the Westphalian Wide Web, as a reference to the Peace of Westphalia in 1600s that established the role of nation states. Right, so it goes right back to this conversation. So when you brought up the topic, my smirking ear to ear, right? Because I think it's relevant. So I have something I'm writing something along those lines coming up in the next few weeks. Right. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Outstanding. And I will, of course, let you know that if you stay tuned to securityboulevard.com, I'm going to have some coverage posts from our last Security Field Day event coming up very soon, talking about the presenters and each of the aspects of their presentations that I think are very relevant to the state of modern security. So make sure that you are subscribed to securityboulevard.com so you don't miss any of those. We also want to thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast. If you enjoyed the conversation, please subscribe on YouTube, ring the notification bell so that you don't miss any episodes, or you can listen to us in your favorite podcast application. We would appreciate a rating and a review. That helps the show grow and lets people know what we're all about. This podcast is brought to you by securityboulevard.com and the Future Room Group. For show notes and future episodes, visit securityboulevard.com, the TechStrong TV website, or check us out on your over-the-top set-top box, Apple TV, Roku, or other smart devices. Just look for TechStrong TV. I hope you're following Security Boulevard on X, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Just look for Security BLVD, and that will get you all the content that we publish. Thanks very much for tuning in. We hope that you have a great week.